Yeah, welcome everyone. So as Luke introduced, I'm Timothy, and in this presentation, I'm going to be discussing a router design pattern within JavaScript. By the end of this presentation, I hope you'll have a good understanding for what the design pattern is and how you can use it to handle certain issues. The one issue with design, or the one main feature of a design pattern, is we use it to handle common problems that appear within code. So what is the problem that we're actually trying to deal with the router? And the issue that comes up is when we have cascading if-else statements or switch statements. Now, an example of this, as a trivial example, is for a router when we want to navigate between different pages based on a particular route that we have in our URL. So here's a trivial example with it. We have a route and we're checking the different URL that we're heading to, and then we navigate to that URL based on our route. The issue here is that this structure is constantly growing. As you add new pages, as you add new routes to go to, this cascading if-else statement just keeps growing and growing. So it just gets longer and longer, which is not ideal within a system that we want. An example of a router that handles this is the React router. And in the React router, you handle it by having a router tag with route elements inside of it. And this will manage how you navigate between the different routes. So to go further with this, we need to answer the question of what is a router? And the Oxford definition for a router is that it is a device which forwards data packets to the appropriate parts of a computer network. This isn't really appropriate for what we're trying to answer here. So I've created a new definition for myself, which is that it is a system or object that takes in some input and redirects it to a particular output or destination. It is essentially routing it to where it needs to go. And I've shown some examples here of types of routers. Even though they may be not obvious, you have your traditional router, which is the device which forwards data packets. But then what about an exchange on the freeway? You routing people to their destinations. So it is controlling where people go to by routing them to the appropriate destination. Then another example is when you're dealing with some form of classification. So you have some form of, in the recycling example, yeah, you have paper, metal, plastic, and it is being processed in a particular way. It is going to a particular destination based on the input that it is. So with this in mind, we're now going to deal with a demonstration, or we're going to go into a code demo of how you can go about implementing it. So for the demo, we're going to deal with an email filter. We're going to filter emails to particular to folders, and then we're going to touch on how you could add new filters with the router pattern. So we just want to minimize this quickly. Here is a look at the demonstration or the demo that we're going to have. So we have an email file or inbox here, and currently there's no filtering being done. So we've received a bunch of emails. There's some birthday emails. There's some important emails coming up from a gent not on leave. And none of these are being filtered at the moment. So when you go to the different folders, nothing's happening. But if, say, we want to actually filter them, we can now use our email filter. I actually want to increase the font size here quickly, just so that everybody can see. And make sure that it is, let's make this 20. And yeah, that's a bit better. Okay, so I've set this up previously so that we could have it without the filters and then apply the filter with a quick change. And now, if we refresh, you can see that now we actually have things being filtered appropriately. This is now using a if-else statement to handle the filtering. So if we take a look at it, you can see that we've got our filter if statements, and we're applying the filter through this process, and we're cascading down based on these conditions. We're just filtering on who it is from at the moment, as it is the easiest way to kind of show how this works. So if we get anything from birthdays, we move it to birthdays. And if we get anything from Tony, we move it to spam, and etc. as we go on. Then the next thing is we want to actually handle this as far as a router is concerned. So to start off, we're going to duplicate this and convert this into a router pattern. The nice part about the router is that it does duplicate, or it does convert if-else statements quite easily. So you can take your if-else statements and you can map them to a router quite quickly. Now, the idea behind a router is that we want to map this using a data structure of some kind. So instead of dealing with if-else statements, you want to use an array or data structure that handles the response. So what we're going to do is we're going to make an array, and we're going to make an array of filters. And inside of this array, we're going to have certain objects. And in this object, we'll define a from, and we're going to say birthdays. And then we will say response. So based off of this, we have a condition for when it is met, and then we have a response that happens when it is met, or when we meet that condition. So in this response, we're going to take an email, and we're just going to move it to a folder. And in this case, we're going to move it from email, or we're going to move the email to email folders. So continuing on with this idea, I'm just pasting that there so that I can see what's going on here. We have from Tony, and we're going to put a response and move email and move to folder. I have already done this, and to save everybody the time of having to sit there going through each one, I'm just going to copy the last one in, and we're just going to put the correct standard there. Now, the one thing that comes up here as well is we don't really have a default action. So previously in our if else statement, we have a final option for else. So we just need to define our default to have a particular response. And it's going to look something like this. And this is going to move to folder, email, and we need to have, okay, just check that all the syntax is correct. And yeah, so now we have our filters array set up, and we have this data structure that we can use. The next thing that we need to do is we need to actually decide how we're going to handle this and how we're going to manage it. And the idea that we want is we want to get a result, or response, sorry, from our filters. So we're going to use our filter router dot filters find. Now what we can do is we can assign an array here that allows us, sorry, not an array, we're going to loop through the array of filters, and we can assign a condition that we want for when that returns the first, or for what is returned at the first point that it finds. So the first filter that it finds is the one that gets returned. So what we want to do here is we're going to return our email that includes filter.from. And essentially we are accessing or we're returning a response for the email where the from is matched within that email. And that is the general idea. Now we need to actually handle the response. So we're going to let our we've defined our result at the top, and we want to let our result equal our response, and we're going to pass in the email into that response. Then we return our result. We still haven't handled our default response yet, so we can use the pipe operator to handle our default. And what this will do is that we need to reference it properly. So what this will do is it'll check if anything is found. If nothing is found that matches that response or that filter, then or matches this condition, then we will return our default. And now that that is the case, we can change up top here this to use filter router. And let's see if that works. So if we open up Chrome and refresh, we've got an error. So email filter JS line 68. I know what it is. We didn't include the comma here. So we need to find our default. We forgot our comma. Now let's try again. And we're still doing it wrong. Something's not defined. Typo. And let's see here. Continue. Okay, I'm just going to take I believe there's a minor error here, so I'm going to take the pre-written filter router and use that, because I don't want to waste everybody's time with me trying to debug this. But the syntax is pretty much the same. So I think there's just a minor error somewhere along the lines here, and it is not working appropriately. Okay, so now let's check. Yeah, there we go. And yeah, so there we have it, that we're actually filtering the emails based on the particular response from the router. The other element that I wanted to touch on is how we can go about adding additional responses to this. So in general, if you wanted to add additional ones as a developer, all you would need to do is just add an extra element to your filters array. This makes it a lot more easier to manage, or it makes it easier to manage and makes it easier to test. The actual if statements are removed or reduced, that you're not managing so many cascading if else statements, and it handles a lot better. So going back to the presentation, there is also ways that you can create, just to touch on this as well, you can also create a function to add a filter to it since this is an email filter, you would have a user wanting to define their own filters, and you can do this programmatically as well, which I have shown here. But I don't want to go on into that too much since there is a limited amount of time. So going back to the presentation, we have, just to wrap up a little bit, here are some other use cases where you may find that this is usable, and traditional ones would include rendering React components, managing webhooks, or as the example I touched on earlier, is handling router for a URL. Yeah, this is I hope everybody has had bit of an educational experience here, and it has been a pleasure presenting this.